What is the best way to design a pitch deck problem slide? Let's find out. Now let's look into some problem story frameworks, how to convey the problem story to your target audience. Now in the previous video, you learned about the three primary market needs. First is stop the pain, second is prevention, and third is pleasure. So by now you might have an idea about which story might resonate more with your market. So the big question is, how do you tell that story on one slide? Now the good news is there are several story frameworks that you can use to describe the problem. The story might be different based on each of your audiences. Now in general, buyers are interested in the story. You want to show them that you understand their problem. Now remember that story we talked about in the previous video about the back pain and the receptionist. Now that's a good story to tell buyers who are experiencing a pain. Now what about investors? Now remember, investors are people who can fund your project. So without their money, you won't be able to create and deliver your solutions. And investors are more interested in numbers. They want to know that if they give you the money, they will get a good return on investment, or is this a good investment opportunity? Now, a consulting company called Story Pitch Deck did a survey asking 30 pitch deck experts to share their tips on creating effective problem slides. Now, there were several points that came up from the survey, but the top three that they all agreed on were: number one, empathy. And that is, a good problem slide needs to show that you empathize with the target market, which means that you need to be able to describe their pain. How well do you understand the problem that they are facing, and why do you care to solve their problem? Now, number two is provide data, facts to support your story. And number three is to use short and powerful writing. The problem slides needs to be easy to scan. Now, if you'll notice that in the empathize the story, it was the consultants who thought the story was more important. Whereas if you look at the numbers, you'll notice that the investors were more interested in data and facts. As for the powerful and short writings, they were almost very close. So now you know that when you're talking to the market as a sales presentation, you need to focus more on the story. And when you're talking to investors, you need to be focusing more on data and facts and numbers to show them why as well. Now, if you recall this image from the previous videos, when you're talking about any solutions, you always start by describing the current state, which is the part A on this diagram. So here's a common framework that you can use for your problem slide. Number one, you describe the pain the customer is facing. What is their current state? And number two is, how do they address the issue today? So we're still talking about the same thing. Now, in other words, what is the status quo, which in Latin means existing state of affairs. So the same principles apply whether you're talking about personal problems, whether you're talking about business problems, or you're talking about social problems. What is the current state? Now, here's an example of how you might use that framework on a problem slide. So you've got two statements. The first statement is, women have less savings and assets to support an adequate standard of living in older age. And then the second statement is, many elderly women rely on family, friends, or the government for financial support. So maybe you're selling preventative solutions. The slide could work well because you got the image of the elderly woman. You've got two statements. It could work well if you're selling services to younger women, where you're trying to encourage them to invest early on, because if they don't, that could be their state in the future. Or maybe you have solutions right now for a pain that elderly women are having. Maybe you have a solution where elderly women can get together and pool their resources so that they can support each other. Now, either way, you're describing a pain to a specific target audience. So that's what a problem slide is all about. You can see here two sentences, and we painted a grim picture of what many elderly women are facing today. So if you take a closer look, you can see that the top statement is describing the pain, and the bottom statement is, how do they address this today? So we were able to tell the entire story in two sentences. Now, here's another common framework that you can use, and it will guide you to ask the right questions. So, number one is overview. So convey an overview of the problem. What is the problem? Number two is impact. Convey the negative impact that the problem is having on people or their experiences. And number three is framing. Explain and describe the context of the problem. So, we need to kind of say who is facing this problem. That's how we can give it context. So, you can mention a specific type of person and what problem they are facing, and this will give more context to your presentation as well. So here's an example of how you might use this framework. So this example is from a company called PhilConnect that I was personally involved with as well. So you can see here the title slide sets the tone. So instead of saying problem, we are using the problem slide title. We're putting it to good use. So we're saying moving dirt is costly and harmful to the environment. So right away we set the context of the conversation. Next is heavy reliance on commercial dump sites and mining of new material is costly and exhausting land resources. So it cost and the environment. Once again, we're reaffirming that story. Limited industrial and team collaboration make it challenging to find, reuse, and repurpose fill material. So the current status quo is making it difficult to collaborate and save costs and the environment. A third statement to kind of give it even more context: rising land costs, increased trucking fees, and lack of nearby options make it challenging to meet industry sustainable goals. So you can see here in 4 statements on a slide with a supporting image, which my partner and friend took at the time to set the tone of the slide. We were able to convey the status quo and the consequences on one slide. So you can see the top is the overview, the title is the overview, and the bottom is the framework. We've got the impact, and we also have the framing, so that we've got all of these components on one slide. Now, here's another common framework that can also help you answer some of the questions. First, you've got problem. Identify the big problem that is causing a lot of little problems. What are the challenges? So pinpoint the challenges faced as a result of this problem, and the impact. Highlight how the problem negatively impacts users and the company, and what's at stake if the problem is not addressed now. So using a similar this framework, you can see this is another slide that has been changed a little bit. It was also based on a client project. So you can see here at the top it says energy powers the world, yet many still lack reliable and affordable access. So right away we set the tone of what's the story. We're talking about power. Then you have 3 statements to support that story. Rising energy costs and intermittent power outages impact residential, commercial, agricultural, and industrial locations. So we're talking about the problem and the impact. Next, outdated wired infrastructure delay the scaling process and adoption of new technologies. Another problem and the impact. Corporate monopolies and lack of Wall Street funding slow the migration to safe, green, and affordable energy. So if we take a closer look again at this problem slide, you can see here that we've got the problem at the top, and the bottom 3 statements are talking about the challenges and the impact. Now, here's another framework that you can use as well to tell the same story. Now, you'll notice they're all very similar. It's just that the order of the story might change and the context might change. So in this particular case, we've got what? Define what problem is faced by the target buyer. How painful? Explain how painful the problem is by going deeper on the impact of the business and who is experiencing, and at what scale. So can you give any estimate on how widespread is this problem? So here's another example from a company that I helped with a client, Global Biocoal Energy. And what they do is they turn forest residue into sustainable biofuel. Sustainable, which is it's more environmentally friendly as well. So in this particular case, we needed 2 problem slides, because once you'll see in the next videos when we talk about the solutions, you'll see how the 2 problems actually solve each other. Now, in problem 1, we talked about woody biomass, which is the wood that is left in a forest region. Now, if you live anywhere near a forested area like I do, I live in Vancouver, British Columbia, and during the summer throughout the West Coast in North America, there's a lot of forest fires. If you live in California, Oregon, Washington State, or even here in British Columbia province, during the summer, we are seeing a lot of forest fires. Now, a lot of it has to do as well because of climate change. It has been drier, so trees are not getting enough water. There's also the pine beetle, which has been eating at trees, so it rots them and then they they end up drying from the inside out. So that leaves a lot of dried trees that could burn. But one of the biggest problems, which a lot of people don't really know about, is that of logging. Now, 70% of the tree is left behind to rot during logging, because the logging industry is really only interested in the bark of the tree. They're in the trunk. That's all they need. The trunk is used for paper, it's used for building, it's used for many resources. But the rest of the tree, which is the leaves and some of the small bark, well, that's not really used much. So in many cases, it's left on the ground to burn. Now, I was surprised with the statistics. About 70% of it is left on the ground to rot, and that eventually rots. It creates methane gas, and then it becomes a fire hazard as well. So this is a big problem that we need to solve. Now, the second problem is the CO2 reduction goals. Now, the world is going against all industries, trying to push towards reducing any environmentally hazardous manufacturing industries and energy producing plants. So, but this is also creating another problem, because right now we've got about 8,500, which is about a third of the world electricity, is still relying on coal. So, of course, that is mined coal. So that's when miners go under the ground and dig for it. So now, what is the solution for them? Well, what if we can give them something that's called biocoal? So it's not something that's going to harm the environment. And this is what this company is doing. They can turn that forest residue, which is left to burn, they can turn it into coal that can now be used in power stations and can be used in other manufacturing stations. So you can see why in some cases, to convey the status quo, you might need to use more than one slide. And that's why we did that in this particular case. And we also used numbers, because if you remember in these statistics, investors are always looking for data and numbers. Now, this was a very general case. I cannot be sharing other client presentations with you, but this one I had permission to share. So if you're trying to get investors, then look for numbers. Try to find any statistics, any data to show why the problem that you have chosen to solve is actually a big problem. That would make a good, effective problem slide. And if you're talking to the buyer, so if you're using your pitch deck to sell the end user on using your product, on your buying your solutions, then you need to resort to more stories. You need to put it into context. You need to help them feel the pain and show them that you understand that pain, and give them a reason of why do you care about solving this problem as well. So that's why in the case of the BioCall, Global BioCall, it was an investor presentation. Now, we did create different variations for them, so depending on the different types of investors. And as you work on your pitch deck, you're going to realize that you might need more than one problem slide. So you might have to create different ones based on different investors that you're talking to. Now, this was one of the more generic ones that we created. So you can see here we've got a little bit of the story. We're giving it context. We're giving the statistics on the logging. And in the next slide, we're also talking about the power plant, 8,500. We're giving it also a context by using numbers. So if you have supporting data, then you can combine them into your problem story. So look for slides that look like this. So you can see here it gives you a chance at the top to add a problem statement, so you can give it context, and then you can use numbers. It could be percentages, it could be dollar amounts, it could be any other data or statistics that can help you tell that story, and that would resonate more with investors. So in this case, you can see 67% of customers complained about this problem. So you can fill in the gaps, put your problem. Revenue, 36 million revenue was lost as a result. So if you're talking business to business, you can say, what is the consequences if they don't solve this problem now? That it could be dollar amount. It could be productivity that you're talking about. So look for slides like this that can help you put in numbers when you're talking to investors. Now, other tips I can give you about the problem slide is aim to answer as many of the following as you can, and then pick a slide layout, because I showed you now different frameworks where you can tell the problem story. You can use them all, experiment with all of them. Now, but the main thing is you need to be answering what is the problem, how painful it is, and show that you understand it. What are the subsequent challenges, because usually one problem might create a little ripple effect of other problems. What is the impact if you don't solve this problem? At what scale? Especially if you're talking to investors, you need to talk about at what scale is this problem taking effect. Now, another tip is to remember the next slide will be the solution. So remember, now we're talking about the problem. So try to describe a problem that will match the solution that you plan to present. So they need to feed off each other. So if you're not sure what to put, then try to think, okay, if I present this to a solution, what kind of problem story is going to feed a bit better into that story? So we're going to continue diving into the problem story and how you can create that better. But for now, can you recall what are the top 3 characteristics of an effective problem slide? Do you remember what they are? Here they are. Number 1 is empathize with the target market. So you need to be able to tell that story from the target buyer perspective. Show that you understand the problem they're facing. Number 2, provide data and facts, especially if you're talking to investors. And number 3, use short and powerful statements. So I showed you examples how within a few short statements you can tell that story. You can have 2 statements, 3 statements, or maximum 4. Try not to go over 4 sentences on your problem slide, and that would make it easy to scan as well. So your action item for this section really is to use one or more of the provided frameworks to create problem slides. And as I mentioned earlier, create as many as you can. You can select the best one during the editing phase, or you might present different problem slides to different audiences. Even if you're talking to investors, some investors might be interested in one particular area, some people might be interested in others, or depending on the investment phase. So as you learn throughout this masterclass, your story will also change based on the size of your company and who you are talking to. So go ahead and get started, and I'll see you in the next video.